Grandma never once used a recipe card. Everything she made came out of her hands, learned the same way her mother learned it, by standing close enough, long enough, that the knowing passed over without a word ever getting written down. These are 12 of those tricks, the kind that never made it into any cookbook, because to her they weren't tricks at all, they were just cooking. Bacon grease can, fat off. Every skillet went through cloth into a can kept at the back of the stove. Bacon, sausage, whatever rendered off a Sunday chicken, all of it strained down together. That can was the week's cooking fat, a spoon of it starting the cornbread, another going into a pot of green beans going soft on the back burner. The rule was simple. Strain it hot, keep the food particles out, store it covered somewhere cool. Handled that way, it kept for weeks. Nobody called it a trick. It was just where the fat went, the same as it had gone for her mother before her, and the first rule of that kitchen was that nothing useful became waste. Screaming skillet cornbread. The cast iron went into the oven hot, grease already in it, until the fat sat close to smoking. When the batter went in, the whole kitchen heard it, a hard, sudden hiss as wet batter hit hot metal. That heat set the bottom fast, giving the cornbread the dark, crisp edge everyone was waiting for. Pour that same batter into a cold pan, though, and the crust comes out pale and soft instead. She never explained the physics of it. She just knew a skillet had to holler when the batter hit it, and if it didn't, something had already gone wrong before the oven door ever closed. Killed lettuce. The first tender lettuce of spring went into a bowl kept waiting right by the stove, and bacon grease straight off the fire, splashed with vinegar, got poured over it hot enough to wilt the leaves almost instantly. The fat softened the greens while the vinegar cut through the richness, so it ate like a cooked green in a salad at once. It arrived at exactly the moment the cellar had gone empty of winter greens, while the new garden was only just starting to give something back. A reminder that in that kitchen, you didn't cook what you wanted. You cooked what the season had finally decided to hand you. Coffee and the chocolate cake. Whatever sat cold in the bottom of the pot from breakfast went straight into the cake batter, never brewed fresh for the purpose. Coffee and chocolate work well together, and a little of it can deepen the chocolate flavor without ever making the cake taste like coffee itself. Asked why, she'd have said her mother did it that way. It made the chocolate taste richer, and you'd have sworn she'd used better cocoa. She hadn't. She'd simply used what was already on the stove, which was something else she understood that no recipe ever mentioned. Sometimes the best ingredient is just the one already there. Cat-headed biscuits and sawmill gravy. A half-pound of sausage browned in the skillet, and the flour went in after, stirred into the hot fat until the raw smell was gone and it had picked up some color. Milk went in gradually after that, stirred as it thickened into gravy. Cooked this way, the sausage stretched much further, seasoning the whole skillet instead of sitting on every plate as its own piece of meat. Arithmetic that fed more people not by making more sausage, but by making the sausage matter. Nobody rose from that table hungry. Leather breeches. Green beans got strung whole with a needle and thread, then hung somewhere dry with air moving through. Behind the stove, on the porch, wherever there was room. They shriveled down until they looked almost like strips of old leather, and that was exactly the point. Drying let the summer harvest carry through the winter with no freezer involved, and later the beans could be soaked and cooked slowly with fat back or another piece of pork. What came back out of the pot didn't taste like a fresh green bean at all. Deeper, darker, changed entirely by the drying. That change wasn't a flaw to work around. The goal was never to make January taste like August. It was to make sure there was still something to eat once August was gone. Brine in a crock. Cabbage and other vegetables kept in a stone crock under salt brine, weighted down so they stayed under the surface. The salt created the right conditions for beneficial microorganisms to ferment the vegetables, producing the sour flavor that made sauerkraut in dishes like it possible. No jars had to be sealed and no freezer had to run. The crock simply sat while time did the work. One rule mattered more than any other: keep the vegetables under the brine. She never needed to know the names of the microorganisms doing the work, just what a healthy crock smelled like, and the moment that smell changed. Springhouse butter. Milk and butter stayed cool with no electricity at all, kept in crocks inside a small spring house built over a cold spring. The water held remarkably steady through the year, giving the kitchen a source of natural refrigeration long before there was any refrigerator to speak of. Milk stayed cooler there than in the summer air, and butter never softened the way it would have sitting out in the heat. Finding a good spring was a real skill, knowing the land well enough to know where the water ran cold. The house built over it afterward was the easy part, and this was the moment old kitchen knowledge stopped being about recipes and became knowledge of the ground itself. Kraut by the moon. Cabbage for kraut went into the crock on days chosen by the old signs, the same kind of calendar that decided when seed went into the ground. There's no real evidence that the moon determines whether a crock of kraut ferments properly, and that's worth saying plainly. But making kraut by hand, year after year, teaches something no calendar ever could. The smell of it, the texture of it, the moment the salt is right and the sourness has developed clean, and the moment something has quietly started to go wrong. The signs gave her a calendar to hang that knowledge on, even if the moon itself wasn't doing the actual work. She could walk past a crock and know it needed tending. No almanac taught her that. 60 years standing over the same crock did. Rendering lard. Fat from the hog killing got cut small and cooked low and slow, never scorched, then strained while it was still hot. Too much heat could darken it and leave an unpleasant taste behind. But handled carefully, it rendered clean and pale, kept for months under the right conditions, and carried the kitchen through winter frying and pastry alike. Even the cracklings left behind weren't wasted. They went into cornbread or beans, wherever a little pork flavor could go a long way. Nothing about that pot was supposed to become waste, because winter had a long memory and no patience for anything thrown away carelessly. The whole hog, salt, and smoke. After the hog killing, hams and shoulders were dry cured with salt, often mixed with sugar and other seasonings, then smoked and hung to age. Salt drew the moisture out of the meat and starved off the conditions most spoilage organisms need to take hold, while the smoke added its own layer of preservation, along with the flavor everyone expected from a proper country ham. There was no single clock hanging in the smokehouse to say when it was finished. Curing and smoking times shifted with the size of the meat, the weather, and the family's own method, so people watched it and smelled it instead, learning what the surface should look like and what the meat should feel like under a hand. A written recipe can tell you how much salt to use. It can't tell you what good curing smells like. Cooking without a single measure. Not a cup, not a spoon, not once. A handful of this, a couple of fingers of that, flour added until it looked right, salt added until it smelled right. She knew a biscuit dough was ready by the way it pulled clean off the side of the bowl, and knew a cake was done by its smell before the oven door ever opened. That wasn't carelessness, it was closer to the opposite. The amount of flour a dough needed could shift with the flour itself, the humidity, how the dough simply felt that day, and her hand understood all of that in a way a measuring cup never could. The recipe for the cake could be handed down easily enough. The hands that knew exactly when it was right could not. Those took decades at the same stove to build, and she only had the one lifetime to build them in. What actually disappeared from that kitchen wasn't the recipes. Those can be written down anytime, by anyone, after the fact. What disappeared was the knowing, built over decades at the same stove, the same crock, the same pinch of cornmeal dropped into hot fat just to see how it moved.